Whew. May the peace of Jesus Christ be with you all. Oh, thank you. Thank you. See, Brite is blessed to have Reverend Dr. Michael as the president now. And I admire you and I pray for you, my brother. Thank you for your ministry. So I'll explain later about all of this and my friends. So this is another one that I have to have. And I'll tell more later, I promise. It's part of the sermon. I wanted to thank you all for being here, for being part of this conference, of coming to the worship services in the evening. I don't take that lightly. I am deeply, deeply honored that you came. Deeply, deeply honored. So thank you. Thank you. I want to thank this church again, the fantastic choir, the organist. Oof. Thank you. You have a fantastic pastor. You know what he said? That he wanted one of those. And I have witness to that. So if you want to give him a gift, I think you would love to wear that during this worship service. Russ, thank you for everything. So we have come to the end of this wonderful conference. And to all who put this together, thank you. So many blessings, stories to tell, and hopefully a renewed heart. I pray that you made friends during this time, so we'll continue walk with you. I shout out to Reverend Lloyd, who's 95. I don't know if he's here tonight. 95. Let's give it up to Reverend Lloyd. Thank you. Woo. Amazing. As we live this conference, let us remember that the only way into the future and the only thing that we can do is to walk together, is to be together. And whatever comes, we will be ready for it. The only way to appease our anxiety is to know that we have each other, to live with us, to work with us, to hold our hands, to love us. So tonight, as we imagine the future of the church, having visited the past, the present, in order to look at the future, I also have questions for you. First, when you look at the future of the church, what is it that you see? Do you see a church crumbling or a church marked by the glory of God? Do you see people holding each other with love, or do you see a people dismantled, angry, distressed, broken? Do you see the church holding the entire world together, or we see all of us watching the destruction of the earth? Second, when you look at the future of the church, what do you feel? Do you feel a sense of trust in God, or do you fear the church will disappear? Coming from another country here, all the reports annually in my church, how much we were declining. I just have this fear built into me that we are going to disappear. So that I have to fight against. That is not the driving force, not that I know, but I that don't know that is in there and makes me act from this fear that is there. That I have to make it conscious so it doesn't act up in everything I can think and feel about the church. Do you see yourself touching the ground and feeling the pulse of the earth? Or you can only feel your breathing up here with a discompensated beat of your heart, through these painful, frenetic days that we are going through. Do you hear the birds singing in the future, or you see a silent spring coming our way? Do you feel you have enough to go through whatever comes, or do you feel weak when you think about the future, when you feel about the future? And third, when you look at the future, what do you think we can do to bring a future that we could all live? So my question is not what kind of church we might want, but rather the necessary church we will need. What is the church that we need? And talking about each one of us, what is it that each one of us have to offer for this church of the future? What we have now that will build the future of the church. Because the future is not going to be just an unimaginable thing coming. No, the church in the future will be what we do, feel, and think now. What conversions and metamorphoses do we need to go through? What do we need to attend? What are the emergencies and the emergencies of the church now that we need to attend? And I hope you carry those questions with you and with your own people in your own community. And I'm going to tell you what I feel and think about the future, or what coming from the future to us that we need to pay attention. I try to keep my ears open, and I can tell you that what I'm hearing, it might be frustrating for some of us, but to be honest with you, all I can hear now, it is the cry of the earth. I spent my whole life listening to people who grew up like me, the cry of the poor. But now I'm learning to tune my ears to the cry of the earth. And this call has not been a long time with me. It started about 6 years ago when I adopted my 3 kids. And being a father made it impossible for me not to think about the future. And I do not worry about my kids finding jobs or mustering the ability to make it to something. Mostly what I worry about is the world that they will be living in. So that worry has to do with other beings, has to do with the land and the incredible diversity that lives within us and around us. What earth will they inherit? We learned from the indigenous people that we have to care for 7 generations. 3 before us, ours, and 3 generations to come. We don't even know what earth you're going to leave for them now. Imagine in 3 generations. Right after they came to my life, my kids, Libby, Cece, and Ike, I had an altar call, a come to Jesus moment. When I heard the call from God through the voice of an indigenous and scientist thinker. Have you heard of Robin Kimmerer? Read her book, please. Braiding Sweetgrass. It's a fantastic book. She gave a talk at Union, and when she was talking, she was telling us how the earth is hurting and how we don't have any way to relate to the earth. She's a botanist. She works with plants, and says we don't even, we think that plants are decoration, are things. And as she kept on going, she said, we don't have rituals to relate to the earth. We don't relate to the earth. We relate with the earth by not relating to the earth. And that moment, I went through a metanoia, a conversion. And I started to think everything very differently, trying to hear the voices of the land and learn how to relate to them. That turn changed my life completely. That's the book that I wrote about this. I don't have any publisher. It is a local pastor in Pennsylvania who I did this. So that's why I have to do some of the marketing. But anyways. it is about how this happened to me and how it changed. And one of the things that changed me was the way that I read the Bible. So I grew up in a church where John 3:16, you know John 3:16, the golden verse, for God the world that gave. There you go. Good for you. You know your Bible. After that change in my life, how do I read this text from the perspective of the earth? How would God talk to me with this text in regards to John 3:16? And it was not difficult to see. And when the Apostle John said, for God so loved the world, God gave God's only Son. And for God so loved the world. Well, that must mean that the world here must be understood in its entirety, which includes beyond humans, all possible forms of life: mountains, rivers, rocks, skies, clouds, rivers, oceans, animals, mosses, butterflies, ants, squirrels, dolphins, sharks, hummingbirds, eagles, owls, worms, beavers, chickens, rabbits, dogs, cats, horses, trees, plants of all kinds, soil, seeds, flowers, bees, spiders, donkeys, elephants, tigers, foxes, snakes, seagulls, peacocks, turkeys, monkeys, finches, whales, rhinos, valleys, burrows, wine, fire, earth and air, and ladybugs, and crabs. For God so loved the world. God didn't say, for God so loved the humans. If that was God's intention, God would have said that. God so loved the world. Everything is different now. How can we love this world that God so loved, with all these precious beings, the way that God loves this world? Well, let me tell you, there's one thing that is not included in this list, and those are the cockroaches. They're not. That was God's mistake in God's whole creation. Because if you can survive an atomic bomb, there's something really nasty about you. That being said, I would never be St. Francis, but, and I'm not trying to love the cockroaches either. But my jacket today reminds us about the risks of all the vulnerable beings in this world. The poor, the indigenous, children, women, colored people, Palestinians, people with disabilities, as well as all the non-human species who are running the risk of being extinct. My hat is a crab calling our attention to our oceans who are dying, becoming acidic as we throw such an enormous amount of garbage every day, killing enormous parts of the oceans. There are parts of the oceans that are completely dead. Oceans are warming to a point where the coral reef, who are fundamental source of the life for the ocean and ourselves, are losing their strength and bleaching out. We are fishing beyond the limits of the ocean, depleting the rich life of the oceans. Our brother Dan Paul is doing amazing work with theology and the oceans. Check out the website bluetheology.com, right? There's good stuff there. For God so loved the oceans that God gave Jesus Christ. For God so loved the darkest parts of the oceans, the coral reefs, the crabs, and all of the fantastic and diverse families of species who live in the earth, that God gave Jesus Christ. For God so loved the bees that God never would allow pesticides in the fields, because Jesus was given to us because of the bees. If we are to survive as a church and as human beings, we must start loving all of those non-human beings with the same love that God has for them. For God so loved the forests that populated them as a beloved community made of endless numbers of species. All the miracles of symbiosis that God makes happen every day. Hallelujah. I pray, my brothers and sisters, my friends, that those species, that non-human, will enter into our worship prayers. Friends, our daily prayers, our sermons, our songs. Let we have the prayers of the people, but let's also have the prayers of other people. Let's have the prayers of trees, rivers, groundhogs, whales, so that we can care for God's creation right there where you live, in that ecosystem that God has placed you to serve. Because God hasn't called you to serve human beings only. God has called you and me to serve the world, or the worlds of God. For there will be no future for the church if the earth dies. If there are no rivers around us, there will be no churches. There will be no future for us if we continue to relate with the land through capitalism, agribusiness, making every part of our cities as profit, for profit, drenching the earth with poison, buildings, killing the land, polluting the rivers, killing all of those who need to live off of the land. Unless we stop our desire to eat everything, nobody else will eat. So as we move forward from here, my friends, I pray that we start thinking theologically differently. Unless we care for the oceans, our theology will be lacking. Unless we care for the seeds and soil, for the plants who provide our oxygen, and for the forests, there will be no future. So I believe God is calling us from the future, right now, to radically expand the notion of God's love in our lives. So we may stop thinking about the future of the church as the human church only. Start thinking about the future of the earth as the whole church of Jesus Christ. As Sally McFadden has said, the earth is God's body. So let us attend to God's body. If John Wesley said, "My church is my world," remember that? We should start saying, "The ecosystems I live with are indeed my church." Just now, my friends, at 54, I'm beginning to realize my growing up was marked by my mother, who sang to the plants every day. And I just visited her recently. She's 91 years old, and she still sings to her plants and talks to them. And when I was growing up, I was looking at my mother, and now I can see such a wisdom. Those plants filled her life with joy, and she gives life to them. I grew up in the city. I know concrete like nobody else. But if you put me half of a mile into any forest, I'll never leave there. I have no idea. So there's a lot of change and transformation to do. Because the transformation of our perceptions of what we pay attention to. And that has to start with a different perception of who and what we love. Last Friday, I went to New York City to listen to an indigenous leader called Davi Kopenawa, a leader of the Yanomamis, a powerful indigenous nation right at the heart of the Amazon forest. He was deeply moving. He just spoke for 15 minutes. But during that time, he's a shaman. And he hears the earth. As I said the other day, he said, you don't hear the earth because the earth is a thing. For me, the earth is alive. And that's why what you call climate change, I call earth vengeance. When he speaks, the Amazon speaks through him. While David was talking about his love for the forest, he was also grieving the death of his people. Because Bolsonaro's presidency allowed miners to come to the Yanomami's land. And they are destroying all the rivers with mercury. Just in 1 year, 570 children died of starvation. In spite of that pain, of that sorrow, of having to mourn his own people, he had a message for us. He said, you need to love the forest. You have to be pierced, arrowed by the forest. He said, it's not enough for you to love your husband and your wife or your kids or your beloved ones or your partner. You have to love the forest. In the midst of death, he's talking about love. He tells us in his book that we are the people of merchandise. See, if we stop buying, if we only buy food and medication, we are going to have an enormous identity crisis. Because you are not U.S. citizens first, you're not Christians first, we are buyers first. Take away the buying ability and we get lost. We don't know what to do with ourselves, where to go. The people of the merchandise. We must change our way to look for our happiness. We need to change our way to understand what happiness is all about. Davi Kopenhauer's message comes from the future. And is a message that comes from the forest to us. Love the forest, he said, time and again. He said, I'm speaking to your heart. Love the forest. And I could see God speaking through him. If we are to think about the possibility of the future of the church, we have to think about the future of our children and grandchildren, and that means we have to love the forest. We have to stop talking about humans all the time. We are the center of everything. Everything in our church is about humans, God-loving humans. And it has been for so long. That's why Psalm 23 might be a way to help us to get there. Perhaps in order to get to that love, we might need to go through the valley of shadow and death, realizing our potential to violence and death. Along with that, we have to realize also that God has promised us that mercy and goodness will follow us. If we follow the road of this love. Psalm 23 can help us with the emergencies of our time and emergencies. What is dying that needs care and what is coming up as life that we need to tend. Perhaps that's the work that you have to do in your church. What are the emergencies that cry, that needs support and sustenance right now? And what are the emergencies? The emergencies and the emergencies, what is coming out as life that you need to tend carefully in your life, in your community. I pray this conference is a metanoia in your heart and your mind, in your ways of perceiving, of listening, Let me tell you a story to finish about the Bedouins who lived in the ancient Mediterranean lands, shepherding lambs in the desert. The story says that the Bedouins used to search for small pockets of land where there was some moisture, places there was a little bit of moisture, and few plants would grow. They would place a sheep in that area and leave the sheep there for a year. The sheep would eat that little grass, poop, and fertilize the soil. Next year, if they were lucky, the pastors, the shepherds, would find a little bit of a meadow or a little bit more of a green part, a land restored. Perhaps they wouldn't be lucky and the lamb would be dead. But even if the lamb was dead, they would decompose and fertilize the land in some ways. So then they would leave another lamb and wait another year. Perhaps the next year, the almost deserted area would become a very small green pasture, and then they would place another sheep. And they would then, the next year, find green meadows that would extend so that they could plant and harvest. The difficult part of the story then, my friends, is that in order for that to happen, the shepherd had to break the legs of the sheep. So the sheep would get used to the land and not run away. It was the only way to survive. Perhaps, I'm not saying that God has to break our legs. No, I'm not saying that. But there is something that needs to be broken in us in order to expand the meadows of our lives and the places we live. Perhaps the breaking of the legs is for us to let capitalism die, or to be more clear, to change our lifestyles, to stop buying. Have you tried to eat only what is in season? I've done that 1 year in Philadelphia, near Philadelphia. Potatoes and tomato, for I don't know how long. I cannot have strawberries in January. Something has to break. For instance, a break is, can you think about a church without a budget? Have you noticed that we can only think in terms of mission, in terms of money? What if there's no money? Can we still have a church? Churches are closing, but they still have 15, 20 people, but they close because they don't have money. What? You're 15. Something has to break. We have to produce, create means, different means to live and to survive. So the valley of shadow might teach us how to become ourselves green pastures, drawing the circle wide so that we can understand ourselves not as isolated beings, but part of an ecosystem where other beings are there for us, with us. You know that your bodies, there's a lot of stuff that is not human in your body that makes you possible to live. Not human. That's why you're alive. How can we care for this meadow where we live? With our rivers clean. Perhaps we will learn to provide for next generations so that they can have a green pasture, so that they can lay down. And also learn how to live, and learn how to live with mercy and the goodness of God, so that they can pass it on to other generations. So how can we respond to the future? Perhaps we can start paying attention to other species. Perhaps we can start to talk and sing to plants, as my mother did. Perhaps we can start listening to the birds more attentively. Perhaps in your church you can start having plants in the altar table, not as decorations, but fully beings participating in the glory of God. Perhaps during the worship you can pray with them, thanking God for their lives. Perhaps you can go down to the river with your whole congregation. Go down to the river to pray. Not to get the good old day religion. No. But you pray with the river. Is the river next to your church clean? If it's not, you shouldn't have baptism. Can you go and weep for the river with your congregation? Perhaps you can start reading the Bible with the land. What would that do? Perhaps you can start worshiping with your church, not always inside of the building. Perhaps you can go out and worship in the little meadow or around the tree like the churches in Africa do. Then you can realize that we are a much bigger ecosystem. The mice around, squirrels, flowers, the seeds, the trees. It is the earth. God gives everything for us through the earth. When we saying God is good, it's because God has given us the earth. So I pray that as we move into the future, we love the world the way God loved it and loves it. All of the other species. Love the world like my mother does. Love the world like David Copenauer does love the forest. I pray that we will drench ourselves with other species so much until we start dreaming with them. Paying attention to the emergencies and emergencies of the ecosystem and not only of humans. Fear not, little flock, fear not. Fear not, for God's mercy and goodness will follow us. Go to the earth with your people, and I'm sure a new, renewed life is waiting. The tree that you live with is waiting for you to say hi. The birds near you are waiting for you to say, I hear you, thank you. The squirrels are waiting for you. The plants are waiting for you. The whole earth is waiting for us. Can we hear it? Thank you for this time together.